and then we'll do some prayers together. By the way, happy Losar to everyone. It's Tibetan New Year today. And so I just wanted to send out my wishes for all of you to have a very auspicious year. Let's recite this praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times together. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayam. Refuge in Bodhicitta, the first time in English and then twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodam soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyen gipe sanam gi, Dola penchir sangye druparsho, sangye chodam soki choknamba, jangchu bardu dakni kabsuchi, daki chanyen gipe sanamgi, dola penchir sangye druparsho. Right, let's do a very short meditation just to give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit. We'll work with the breath for the first few minutes just to calm the mind. And then I'll come in and I'll lead you in a short reflection to set our motivation for today's session. So I'll ring the bell here in the Gompa to start things. Again, work with the breath in whatever way you prefer for these first few minutes. set of motivation for today's session. Recall in last Saturday's class, we looked at this idea of two arrows, and the third arrow that is something we do on the basis of the previous two. Let's review these and even think back on the last week. And think about the times when you've been hit by the first arrow. The first arrow is when some moment of suffering occurs, something unpleasant. Sometimes it's physical, through our senses. Though it can at times even be mental, something we recall, time when someone hurt or injured us. That first arrow, we don't have a lot of control over. The first arrow occurs for a variety of reasons. Then we often create the second arrow. This is the arrow of our thoughts, our inappropriate mental attention. We're looking at that suffering through a lens where we create anger, frustration, annoyance, even hatred sometimes. This is where we're working this weekend, is to try to reduce the tendency to create a story around what happens to us, various moments of suffering that eventually we can be free of. But right now we have to work on being free of the second arrow. Stop hurting ourselves and others through creating a fiction, inappropriate thoughts that cause us to then sometimes say and do things to others that are harmful. That's the third arrow. So again, just in briefly reviewing this last week, when you've been hit by that first arrow, was there a cognizance of the process that happens with the second arrow? And some effort made to do something different, to not always follow our habitual reactions of anger, frustration, and so on, and instead choose to do something different. And if we weren't able to avert the second arrow, and hopefully at least we didn't create the third arrow, something really harmful that we would say or do on the basis of those thoughts of anger. Again, if we did at least refrain from that, then be happy that you did that. You've got better cognizance of this whole process, these three arrows, and how to work with keeping things from becoming more harmful to both ourselves and to others. So maybe just reflect for another minute or so on your own experience over the past week. Where were you able to catch things? Where did you do something different? And just feel good that you at least have an awareness of the process. Set a motivation on the basis of this short reflection that we're here to again work on our own minds and changing our thoughts and patterns to respond more compassionately towards ourselves as well as towards others, so that we stop creating this cycle of suffering through our mind of anger, through our wish to retaliate, take revenge on others who harm us, and so on. And through this work, we can certainly accomplish more peace for ourselves, and that's a level of motivation we can bring to the day. But if we're in a more peaceful state, then we will also be bringing greater peace to others, helping them to not get inflamed by anger, helping them even to greater degrees as we develop our own qualities and abilities. So think that we're here to work on ourselves so we can also then be better qualified to help others. It's fun. In the day. So, so let me go ahead and put on the screen the outlines that I had from last week. And again, these documents are all there on the course materials link that is at TNL's website. We went through, this is the again, course outline. It's just a single sheet that's got everything that we're working with here, including the references to the various practices. The first one, we just talked about investigating anger in patients to make sure, again, that we're clear that what we're working with here is to overcome the delusion we call anger. We sometimes have, as His Holiness points out, a mind of kind of righteous indignation, where there are things going on in society that we need to be attentive to and try to correct. And we can do that with a peaceful mind, with a compassionate mind. But anger here is the delusion, where we are looking at things in a mistaken way. We talked about patience as being the antidote to that, and to this whole two days of workshop where we're really looking at the techniques for developing patience. Then we talked a bit about the mind in Buddhism, some of the factors and how anger arises, and that's where we talked about the two arrows and the third arrow that sometimes can happen. Again, this term inappropriate mental attention, when we look at things incorrectly. Of course, the Buddha says that all of our delusions, not just the anger, but even our attachment and desire, our jealousy, greed, what have you, all of these are thoughts. They're just inappropriate thoughts. We're not looking at things correctly. This is what we're trying to do in going through the remaining work that is in this course. So we began this with the first level of practice. Again, I've set these out in what I would consider to be level of difficulty. Not to say that some people may find some of the later ones to be easier than some of the earlier ones, but the initial level of practice, of course, is to recall the faults or disadvantages of anger. We don't recall that sometimes. We quite easily go to a mind of anger, forget the effects that it has on us in terms of mental patterns that we're creating and physical effects that we have, as well as the detrimental effects on others. So again, this was in the second practice, was kind of working with that. And this is a good impetus for us to engage in this type of study and practice, is to really see that anger plays no real beneficial role at all. Again, the anger that His Holiness speaks of, where we are actually doing something about something that needs to be corrected in society, that's very different. It's not a disturbed state of mind. It's a mind that is motivated by compassion. We looked a bit in that first level of practice also about how we use meditation and mindfulness in applying these techniques. This even is down to the level of observing our anger when it comes up. If we have a greater awareness of what is actually occurring in our minds, then we will be more attentive to how to correct it. This is why the skill of mindfulness is very much a part of all of our Buddhist practice and all Buddhist traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, we don't emphasize it maybe in quite the way that it's in, for example, a Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition. Had some quotes from him about mindfulness. But mindfulness is the ability for us to stay present with what's happening in our minds. And of course, not just to kind of watch it. Oh, I'm watching myself get angry. Oh, how interesting. you know, it's to do something about it. When we see that the mind is going in a particular direction, then we want to be attentive enough to fight it in some way. There's that wonderful verse from the 8 verses of Thought Transformation by Geshe Langri Tangpa. It's vigilant the moment a delusion appears in my mind, endangering myself and others. I shall confront and avert it without delay. That's kind of our job. That's your whole job in Buddhism, essentially. When it comes down to the nitty gritty, obviously, we want to become a Buddha for the sake of others and engage in all these various practices. But the day-to-day work is to be vigilant, to actually be paying attention to our minds. And when we see something arising that shouldn't be there, that is detrimental to ourselves and others, such as anger, we need to confront and avert it without delay. That's the job. There's also that wonderful quote from Geshe Ben Kongyal, who was one of the great Kadampa masters as well. I always like stories about him. But his quote is, standing at the door of the afflictions, holding the spear of the antidotes. Other than this, I have no other joy. It's like that's our job to kind of be there with our mindfulness, with the spear of the antidotes. And that's what we're looking at in the last part of last week, as well as all of today. What are the antidotes, the things that we can actually use that are a different way of looking at things, but not just different, a more correct way of looking, something that actually is grounded in truth and in fact, as opposed to our deluded states of mind and anger that is not grounded in that at all. So this is our job, is to really observe what's going on with our minds, be attentive to our minds. And I did introduce you to some information that came from 6seconds.org. Again, I didn't want to teach too much on that. It falls a little bit outside of Buddhism, but it's definitely a tool that we can use to have greater awareness and to kind of change our habits, to actually see that we can do that. Our minds are changeable, without a doubt. Many of us, changed our minds already. So we can be cognizant of that, but recognize there's still some work to do. We went on then to the second level of practice, and this one, we didn't get through all of it yet. We were in the first part of it, recollecting and accepting the nature of things. And in practice number 4, I have a whole bunch of little kind of bullet points. Let me put that on the screen here. It's here. You see that we're looking at this topic of examining the reality of the situation and to see what's going on and to recognize that in line with Master Shantideva's advice, if it's something we can do something about, because sometimes this does happen, something arises in our life and we can actually do something, like it says in point 2 there, is it something that you can change? If so, what might you do to facilitate that change rather than getting stuck with anger or frustration? To really put our focus on, okay, something's happening in my life that would normally trigger my anger. Well, let's look at, can it be solved? And if it's something that can be solved, well, my energy is much better placed doing that than to get angry and frustrated and red in the face and start yelling at somebody. The third point on that meditation is the other part of Master Shantideva's voice. If it's something you cannot change, that you simply have to resign yourself to the reality, well, then it's useless in becoming agitated. We have to let it go by relaxing the mind. Now, this is a technique that's really very powerful. And as I said, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Oh, we've got all kinds of times going. Thank you, David. So if it's something that you can actually do something about, can do that. If it's something that you have to resign yourself to the reality of, well, then accept it. This deeper level of acceptance. It starts with kind of accepting what is going on, kind of going, okay, I'm accepting that suddenly there's somebody accosting me in the parking lot at the grocery store or whatever. Sometimes use that example. Happened to me a couple of times. All of a sudden somebody's complaining about the way you parked or you don't like the look of your face or whatever. So when that happens, we can go, okay, I can accept that this is going on. I don't need to create this kind of shield of resistance, what have you. I can then look at, well, what can be solved? Well, what do you need from me? There's actually a friend I had who lives, I don't know if he lives in Santa Fe anymore. I haven't seen him in a while. He would take his dog to the dog park. And sometimes his dog, I guess, was a bit adventurous and would kind of hang out with some of the other dogs in ways that dog owners didn't like. I don't know. So sometimes if dog owners would come up to him because it was his dog and like start shouting in his face. And his response was to say, what do you need from me? What is it that you need? When you kind of throw a question back at people, this is often a way to deflect people who are angry, right? Because then they have to think about, well, what is it that I really am asking for here? Rather than venting their own stuff, right? What will fix it for them? If there's something that will fix it for them, well, wouldn't that be nice to know so that we can then fix it and we can go on with our lives and not get into this huge altercation in the parking lot or what have you, or in the dog park? So again, we can see that there's really a lot of benefit if we can actually change something and make it into a different situation. There are many times where you can't change things. There's always something you can change, though, in terms of your mind. Now, that's the Buddhist approach, right? Even if it is something that you cannot change externally, this is the way it is, right? Well, then you have to change your mind. You have to look at it differently. I want to share a little quote that comes from Viktor Frankl. Most of you know he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was in Auschwitz, and This quote is not really, I've actually read up on the internet and it's attributed to him, but it's actually not found in any of his written works. But I love this quote. Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I love how he uses the word response. I mentioned this last week. I like to differentiate response as being the healthy way to respond and take responsibility for what's going on. Whereas reaction is just reacting, continuing to do the same thing again and again. And that's not a technical definition you'd find in the dictionary, probably, but in Buddhist terms, it makes a lot of sense. We don't want to, every time we are stimulated by something that comes along that causes some suffering, we don't want that habitual reaction. We actually want a response. We have to see that there's some space there. We have to create that space to some degree. Remember last week I talked about that 6-second thing that we actually have, according to science, 6 seconds where when you have something that enters into your field of experience, it's causing a chemical change that's going on in your body to get that whole process of receiving that data. That lasts about 6 seconds. After 6 seconds, as was mentioned last week, if you are still continuing to have that, you are choosing to have that. You are choosing to create that pattern of being offended by what the person has said or whatever is going on. So that 6 seconds is a tough period to work with. We all looked at this idea. We looked at this idea last week of the refractory period. Refractory period is a period where it's very difficult because of the intensity of what's going on in our minds to do something differently. We have to create the space. We have to create the space for that and have enough tools to be able to use at that time. I used to like to watch Batman on TV when I was a kid, and I liked how Batman had a utility belt, right? He had all these various things that he could use and take out the little thing that he throws up at the building in order to climb up to the building. We need a utility belt, right? Because not the same antidote is always going to be applicable in every situation, or we're not necessarily going to think of using it, or it may not even be something that works for us that time. We need to have many things to draw from. I hope that in assembling what I've done here, which is through the kindness of Venerable Tipton Children's book, Working with Anger, where I've drawn things from there and many passages that kind of illuminate those particular practices that she's assembled, that you've got many tools that you can work with by the end of today. But we started looking at these again through the first few that I just examined with you. Let's go back to but again, Viktor Frankl's quote, we need kind of a way to create our response, something that is more in line with a healthier way of being for both ourselves and for others. The second thing on this meditation practice number 4 is recalling change and the impermanence of things. This is where we ended last time we went through this topic. This is a reality that the Buddha taught, and even the Buddha taught on his deathbed. He emphasized the nature of impermanence because even the Buddha died, right? He had the body ceased to function and consciousness went on. Of course, it was the consciousness of a Buddha at that point. But the idea is that everything is changing. The situation that we're dealing with is changing. And so let me just review the questions on that. When you're having a particular incident occur, you can think, at this moment, are you being taken off guard because of not being aware of the fact that everything changes and that your expectations to the contrary aren't in line with reality? I had to remind myself of this as well as tried to remind others that I was working with during the beginning of the pandemic. Remember that time? What about 4 years ago, right? Around this time of year when all of a sudden we were hearing news about this, all of a sudden everything's shutting down. The center here no longer having classes in person, everything, people weren't expecting this, right? But it's change. It's the nature of existence. Things change. And we have to deal with that change, kind of ride the waves of change. But people get bent out of shape because things change, especially in relationships. When somebody starts behaving in a way that isn't the way that they prefer them to behave, people change, things change. Number 2, in terms of what you are experiencing and how you are feeling, are you exaggerating the importance of what is happening to you at this moment? This is a big one. We looked at this idea of the 5-year plan, like in 5 years, will this particular incident, what is happening right now that is triggering your anger, will that be significant For many of the things that we've gone through in our lives, getting accosted in the parking lot or whatever, many things, they're gone now, right? They're just a memory of the past. They're not charged in the way that they are in the moment. But because things, again, are happening in that moment, we're not aware of the impermanence of things, we take them so much more seriously. In a week, in a month, in a year, be quite insignificant. That's the third question. So again, this is the one that we went to at the end of last Saturday, was just to kind of gain an appreciation for how everything changes. It was interesting. D.T. Suzuki, the great Zen master, according to Richard Lewis, I think is his name. Richard Lewis, I think that's his name. No, Lewis Richmond. I was right the first time with Richmond. Lewis Richmond. He wrote a book called Aging as a Spiritual Practice. Work on my memory of things. um, he said that D.T. Suzuki once was asked by somebody at one of his teachings, you said a whole lot of stuff, a lot of which I don't even understand. Can you tell me something simple that I can really get? And D.T. Suzuki simply said, everything changes. I mean, it's a simple concept, right? It's just two words. Everything changes. But it takes a lot to accept that reality. We're constantly on this treadmill of change, right? Everything just always moving in a direction of moving into the future. Talk about kind of being mindful of the present moment. Well, where's the present moment? The present moment is just this fleeting thing that is occurring because there's change constantly. Nothing staying the same for even a moment. So again, those are two of the tools in your utility belt. Again, is to have the awareness of accepting the situation and looking at it very practically. Can I change something, or is it something I need to accept? Secondly, being able to understand impermanence. And again, some of the other things we discussed as well that I just reviewed can also be quite useful, especially with kind of minor things that are, in my estimation, it can become more powerful over time. Just to be observing anger sometimes allows you to have a different vantage point and the anger doesn't arise. So let me just see if there are any questions on any of that and what I covered last Saturday. That was just a brief recap of what our 4 hours together last week. So anything online?
Are there any questions online?
Do you have a question on? No? Okay, then let's carry on. So again, the other document besides those practices and the outline that I've created for you is the readings. Again, I'm trying not to do too many of the readings to like go through them paragraph by paragraph, but nonetheless, I've drawn some things from various sources that I think are really quite useful as a starting point for our discussion. So for the next topic, which is all again within accepting the nature of things and what have you, this is the very nature of existence. This is from, again, Venerable Chodron. She says, it is helpful to recognize that being let down is part of the very nature of cyclic existence, part of the nature of our lives. And suffering and disappointment are bound to happen because we are under the influence of disturbing attitudes, negative emotions, and karma. We're going to talk about karma in a little bit, even though this is a course where I'm trying to keep it approachable for whoever's in the room, even if you don't have Buddhist teachings on karma and what have you. I think it's important that we frame it in terms of karma, and we'll look at that again as a separate topic shortly. But in the Buddha's basic teachings, we see that we're in this state called cyclic existence, samsara, that is unsatisfactory because our disturbing attitudes, negative emotions, karma are all driving the show. In other words, there's a kind of fundamental contamination to our minds and experience that makes suffering inevitable. So she continues in that next line saying, why be surprised when they do go south, when we do have suffering and disappointment? Being aware of the nature of cyclic existence in this way will propel us to eliminate its causes by practicing the Dharma. Meanwhile, we can recognize that others are under the influence of disturbing attitudes and negative emotions, just as we are. Why should we expect that ordinary sentient beings similar to ourselves would be continuously kind and clear in their motivation and actions? Yet we do have that expectation sometimes, right? That everyone's going to be kind to us. They're all going to be pleasant to deal with. They, as we, are frequently overpowered. by prejudice, misjudgment, fear, and greed. When they do or say things that hurt us, they are doing so because they are unhappy. This is, of course, a big one that I mentioned last week, I think, as well. I shared that little phrase, and I think kind of where it comes out of it. Hurt people hurt people. People who are hurt do hurt others. Well, all of us are hurt at some level, right? All of us are dealing with the suffering nature of reality. This existence that we have is something we would ideally like to be smooth and wonderful and every day go like we would like it to go. But that's an unrealistic expectation. And we're all dealing with that. And everyone we meet is, again, hurt to some degree, is dealing with their own stuff, is under the sway of their own emotions. We're going to look at this in the very next section, not the immediate point under this, but the next practice from the lens of seeing a more compassionate response to things. I think that's what's coming up, maybe. No, actually, it's a little bit further beyond that. But the idea is that we're not talking about compassion yet here. We're just simply wanting to have understanding. You don't, if you can generate compassion for the other person, well, that's great. That's in a later practice, a more difficult practice. But just understand that everyone that you meet, probably, even though you might be meeting Buddhists, who knows, you might be meeting more enlightened beings, but everyone you meet is under the sway of their own afflictive emotions. Everyone we see in the news, political figures, worldly figures, whatever, they're all under the control of their delusions, right? And that's, again, something that we can bring that understanding so that we recognize this is the very nature of existence. It is inevitable that I'm going to experience suffering. There's a wonderful meditation that Larry Rosenberg introduces in his book, Living in the Light of Death. It actually comes from the Pali tradition, and I won't go through all the points. The first three are good enough for us to meditate on. The first one is, illness. I am subject to illness. Illness is unavoidable. I am subject to aging. Aging is unavoidable. I am subject to death. Death is unavoidable. And we could just plug in there any suffering, right? I am subject to suffering. Suffering is unavoidable. We do end up waking up every day with kind of an expectation that that day is going to be free of suffering. Well, why do we do that? Why do we have that expectation? It's pretty unrealistic, right? We woke up every day and we kind of said, "Oh, I'm kind of expecting a sort of bit of happiness, a bit of suffering, and I'll just be okay with whatever comes about." Well, we have a different frame of mind, right? When things do come into our field of experience, we'll go, "Well, it's natural that this happens every now and then, that a driver gets upset at me and practically cuts me off, or that something wonderful, a person gives me a gift and I'm very happy with them." All of this stuff is just part of the field of experience. As sentient beings, as human beings in particular in this human world, we are subject to experiencing both. And actually, both are really useful to us. Experiencing the happy stuff does just give us some flavor of the potential we have for deeper states of mind that go beyond just sensory pleasures and what have you. But experiencing the suffering reminds us that things are not okay. We live our lives with blinders on, thinking, "Oh, it's all just fine. I'm okay. You're okay. Everything's okay." It isn't. We're in an unsatisfactory state. And as was said by Venerable Choden there, we want to be able to put effort into practicing the Dharma to eliminate those causes. This is kind of driving us towards realization in Buddhism that we often talk about as renunciation. Renunciation is seeing things as they are and recognizing that to get caught up in the patterns of seeking happiness within cyclic existence, within our conditioned existence, doesn't make sense because it's always going to let you down. You're never going to find that happiness and peace within this conditioned world. You're going to have to transcend it. You're going to have to find the causes that are deeper for your well-being. And those are, again, working on our minds. Those are achieving all the positive qualities. That one comment from the Zoom room that the audio is not so good today. I don't know. Is it coming in through here or Zoom through the microphone? Let's just make sure that the audio is okay. No, that they're not hearing the audio quite as well. They're hearing it, but I think the audio is just not quite as good. And that was the comment. Make sure that the microphone is more so it's closer to my mouth. Maybe that's better. I don't know. Okay. People are hearing okay. Is it better? A little bit better? Yeah. I think it was further away from my mouth. Okay. Make sure it's close there. Okay. So let me know again, put something in the chat box if it does go south. But all right. So there is this idea again then that we need these suffering experiences to alert us to reality, to alert us to what is going on that we need to pay attention to. Say, this is the nature of psychic existence. I have to learn to renounce all the things that draw me into psychic existence that make me blind to that reality, make me blind to the nature of existence. I wanted to share a little quote here. I mentioned last week, and I haven't really talked about it so much, but one thing I'm doing here in Santa Fe as I've gotten more involved with our interfaith organization, which I've been involved with for many years, but it seems like I'm just being drawn to do more work with them. We became kind of started a little charter group of what's called Nonviolent Santa Fe. There's a Nonviolent Cities project that's run through Pache Beni in the United States, trying to get various cities in the country to become nonviolent Chicago, nonviolent wherever. We're Nonviolent Santa Fe. And every nonviolent city group gets to choose what sorts of activities they'd like to do to promote nonviolence in their community. So we just started doing a training. We've done 3 of these trainings now, is like an exploring nonviolence, a little workshop, a 2-hour workshop to begin to work with these concepts. And some of you may know of Marshall Rosenberg. Marshall Rosenberg has done a lot around nonviolent communication. And one of the men that is in leading this workshop with me actually is quite well trained in nonviolent communication. So he shared a quote there from Marshall Rosenberg that I think is just so Buddhist that I just wanted to share it. And it's very much in line with what we've been talking about in this section in particular. All criticism, attack, insults, and judgments vanish when we focus attention on hearing the feelings and needs behind a message. The more we practice in this way, the more we realize a simple truth. Behind all those messages we've allowed ourselves to be intimidated by are just individuals with unmet needs, appealing to us to contribute to their well-being. That little bit at the end about these are hurt people we're dealing with. These are people who have their own stuff that is not being met, their own needs. It's frustrating them, and that's why they're acting out of that. I mean, look at ourselves. It's often the case too. I mean, sometimes we get very irritable when we haven't gotten enough sleep, or we get very irritable when some of the people who are very close to us are not being so kind, and so then we take it out on other people, right? It's the same for everyone we meet who's attacking us or doing something that we find offensive. They've got their own stuff that if we begin to tune into their feelings, if we begin to even ask, kind of similar to that man I was mentioning in the dog park, what is it that you need right now? How can I help you right now? These are much better responses than to say, what the hell are you talking about? Da da da, get into a whole back and forth about who's right, who's wrong, whatever. And those things don't ever end well, right? Better to just kind of be curious. This is a word that this man who's I'm mentioning, who was in one of the leaders, facilitators with me of these workshops on nonviolence, he emphasizes this a lot. Be curious. I think this practice here is also for us to be very curious. I'm really curious about this person, not putting up this shield and resistance and wanting them to get out of my life, but rather being curious. Well, what's going on for you today? Is there something that I can help you with? I'm sorry that you're having a bad day. Be just kind of a little more conciliatory with these folks who happen to come into our experience as that first arrow. That's a much better response. It's always going to lead to well, not always, because there may be some people who are like, what the hell are you asking me for? I don't know. I mean, they might get really irritated by you being more quizzical about what's going on for them. But at least to have that cognizance that this is somebody who's got their own story that they're following that day. They woke up with the same thoughts that we wake up of. We'd really love the day to go just exactly how we'd like it to and what have you. Okay, that's probably enough on that. I just wanted to emphasize that idea of having some curiosity, just really looking at others as they've got a story. at least willing to hear some of that or be open to the possibility of that? I'm going to look at this in the next section as well when we get into seeing things from another person's point of view. So the practice for this, and I do like to go through the practice just in covering the questions so that we're clear about how the questions then fit with what we just talked about. We have 3 questions under seeing the nature of existence. To what extent have you accepted that having problems such as this, whatever it is that is occurring, and being let down are part of life, that they are part of the human condition? I remember when I read M. Scott Peck's Road Less Traveled many years ago. Most of you know this book. It starts off with the simple phrase, life is difficult. I think it was like the doorway to get me into Buddhism, right? Because that's where the Buddha started, right? Saying life is dukkha, is suffering. We have to kind of get that having problems is a part of life. And it's his book, of course, was emphasized, M. Scott Peck's book is emphasizing relationships. Relationships are difficult. You're going to have difficulties in a relationship. If you run away every time there's a difficulty, good luck, because you're never going to go anywhere. You're never going to grow or develop. Number 2, are you and your situation really that different from other people and what they experience? I think that it's another form of honesty we need to have with ourselves is when we have something going on with us, we think it's so tragic, right? Because it's happening to me. I'm going to talk about this more as we go through the day as well. This tendency to be very self-centered and self-focused when anger is arising. But is it really that different from what other people experience? Am I going through such a huge cataclysmic event that no one ever has gone through? No, chances are what I'm encountering is what everybody encounters pretty much every day. The irritations, the annoyances, what have you. Number 3, if others are involved in your situation, are you expecting them to behave in ways that are beyond their capability? Probably, right? Can you see that they might be overpowered by their own negative emotions, just like you? In other words, can we see them as people who are under the control of these factors in the same way that we are? And even, what's kind of interesting, we're going to get again to compassion later, but if we really understand that at least we, meaning us who are hearing these teachings and whatever situation we're in, we at least have access to tools to work with our anger. Many people lack that completely. I was mentioning last week how even there are some people who identify so strongly with their anger that they don't even think it's something they need to address, right? I'm just an angry person. I was born this way. They think that they were always exhibiting that behavior, maybe because parents were angry all the time. They don't think there's anything even wrong with having anger. So we at least have tools. We at least have a cognizance that we want to do something different. Most people you meet on the street have no awareness of it. They're just going on autopilot and just following their reactions and not really even questioning it. So again, look to what degree we are accepting that reality, that is how most people are. Again, I'll go to the point of view of actually looking at them more compassionately because of that. At least have that understanding, at least understand that everyone you meet is kind of dealing with their own stuff. What's that one phrase? Be kind to others because everyone you meet is fighting a great battle. I think I don't know who that was, some Greek person who came up with that quote. Everyone's fighting a battle. All right, so whoops, I didn't want to go to this one. I wanted to go to the readings again. Let's go to the next section. Regarding looking at things from a wider perspective. This was taught about here, but it's actually even interesting. His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu talk about perspective as one of the 8 pillars of joy, and having a bigger perspective does create the potential for less anger, craziness, what have you, and greater joy in our lives. So let's look at what's said here by Venerable Chodron. We need to put our suffering in perspective. We generally feel that the betrayal of our trust is unfair. The world should treat me better, says our self-centered attitude. However, if we compare the injustice we experience with the injustice that others in the world experience, ours is likely to be relatively minor. Most of us are not refugees due to political circumstances beyond our control. We are not on death row for crimes we did not commit. We are not being lynched or put in a concentration camp. Looking at our situation from this wider perspective, our mind becomes stronger and more capable of bearing the suffering. course, we must still oppose injustice, but we can do so with compassion, free from self-centered anger. So again, when we look at the things going on in our world, this is one of these techniques that I'm always a little leery to give people in some regard, because I don't ever want people to think that I'm in any way diminishing the importance of their own experience. For some people, really slight suffering can be really difficult for them to bear. Just don't have the skills and abilities to kind of deal with any slight thing going wrong. Perhaps we know people like that, right? Where it's just you talk to them and you're on the phone or texting with them or whatever, and they're saying something like, "Oh, I woke up and this happened," and you're like going, "That happened," and you're upset about it. And kind of, you just don't even understand why somebody would be so upset about something that you consider trivial. But the reality is that what you are experiencing, many things that you experience, are trivial when compared to the reality of what so many people in our world are experiencing. I don't want that to diminish the importance of your own suffering in terms of to say you should just stuff your feelings or something. It just means that perspective sometimes does change our way of looking at things. Our parents did it, right? When we not eat our food or something, they say, well, there are people starving in the world right now, make us feel guilty about not eating our food or something. I don't want to make that kind of mentality behind this of like every time that you feel bad about something going on with you, you should immediately think about people who are worse and kind of, again, forget those feelings of suffering. But it can help diminish it. Watching the news and seeing what's going on in our world, it's hard to be open to all of that suffering. That suffering can put your own in a very different perspective. It's not so serious when we think about what people are going through in Gaza Strip right now, or what people are going through in Ukraine, in parts of Russia, and of course in so many parts of the world where there's climate disasters. My gosh, in California even, where huge rains last week and what have you. We're not dealing with that right now, folks. Kind of be okay with dealing with some minor sufferings. So this technique, again, is maybe not an immediate go-to one, but it can be very useful sometimes to just say, okay, my suffering's not that significant compared to what so many other people are dealing with. So let's look at the practice for this, and looking at our suffering from a wider perspective. Just a few questions that are here. Are you seeing your problem or difficulty only from the perspective of your self-centered attitude and are therefore not aware of the situations of others? Does it help to recall the various experiences that other people have in their lives, especially those who are in situations with much greater suffering than yours? Right? We really do put that perspective on it. It sometimes does help kind of get us out of our, oh, me, poor me, what's happening to me. Does holding an awareness of others and seeing your own suffering as relatively minor help you to lessen the thoughts of anger and allow you to bear what is difficult for you at this time? And these are all questions I think that revolve around trying to diminish that sense of self-importance, the tendency to see our problems as magnified beyond what they really are. And if we do have that comparison to others, we can perhaps see what we're going through in a lot different light. And I throw out this phrase, and you probably have heard it before, first world problems. I don't like it again in every way because I don't want to diminish the importance of someone who is really, really agitated and under great pain because of something they're going through that does seem relatively minor. A lot of the stuff that we go through is first world stuff, folks, because we have all of these amazing comforts in our lives and something just goes off. Like we don't have our Wi-Fi goes out for a day and it's just the end of the world, right? Because we can't get on our computer and we can't do this and we can't stream and we can't whatever. Folks, there are places in the world where they don't even have Wi-Fi, where they don't even have computers to go online. So it's just, again, to put it in perspective and maybe even laugh at ourselves. One thing I haven't talked about is introducing humor into this whole process of kind of overcoming our anger. We should be able to see how silly we are sometimes, right? You don't have to share it with the world. You don't have to get online and put it on your Facebook page or something. Oh, I'm so silly today. I was doing this and all. If you want to, I mean, it's kind of nice to admit to the ways in which we do this. Maybe other people will get a kick out of it and actually see their own foibles. But we have to have some humor with ourselves too. Recognize how ridiculous it is that we actually get so caught up in things making mountains out of molehills, like they say, making something into something that is not really what it is. Comparing it to other people's situations and dilemmas and suffering in this world. What we're going through is relatively minor. And some of you in the hearing this may be going through really difficult stuff. And again, I'm not telling you this is applicable for everything that you go through, because some things can be really, really hard and challenging in this life. But for a lot of stuff, just comparing it that way can be quite useful. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. These, again, are all within this idea of kind of seeing things more clearly in terms of what is actually going on. Now we're going to go to the topic of karma and rebirth. I'll talk a little bit about karma as going into this, but let's go through the passage here, and then I'll talk about these two concepts that are very much interrelated in Buddhism. I think most of you who are listening have teachings in them, so I won't belabor the point, but I think it is good for anyone who's joining who doesn't have a grounding in these to at least explain things a bit. Venerable Chodron says, considering the unpleasant and unwished for situation we are experiencing as a result of our own karma helps our mind remain calm. Blaming others for our suffering is a dead end, for we can never control others' behavior. And that's the first arrow stuff, right? I mean, others are going to behave the way they're going to behave, and we're going to run into things constantly. Instead of giving our power away by thinking our happiness depends on the other person, on them behaving in a particular way, we can regard our own previously created actions to be the real reason for our being in this situation. People betray our trust and hurt us because we did the same to others, either in this or previous lives. Maybe again, not to that same person in this life, but to others in general. We create that type of energy. At first, we may not like to hear this, but when we think about it, who among us has not deliberately hurt someone else's feelings? Since we all have, why are we so surprised when we receive back what we have given to others? This point of view empowers us, because if our past harmful actions have resulted in our difficult present situations, then our present actions, which we can choose to make positive, can result in a happy future. This again is the main point of all of this, is that when we are attentive to what is going on through the lens of karma, then we see that what I am experiencing is a ripening of what I did in the past that is now coming back to harm me. There's this wonderful text that I've taught on a number of times called The Wheel of Sharp Weapons. The idea is it's kind of like this wheel of sharp weapons is kind of like a boomerang that you throw out to harm someone else. Through our own ignorance and crazy mind, we try to harm someone else, and then they may get harmed in the process, but it comes back like a boomerang to harm us. That's the nature of karma, is that everything we do, we end up being on the receiving end of that energy. We end up having that experience ripen into our own misfortune. That's just the nature of karma. Everything that we do through our minds, through our bodies, through our speech, creates karmic seeds, good or bad. Because this is also how good things happen in us. Right now we've got unbelievable good merit karma that we've created in the past through our good actions to be relatively well off in this, to have the things that we do have, to live a first world life generally, with lots of pleasures and conveniences and comforts and what have you. This is unbelievable ripening of good actions you've done in the past. And when something comes in that is suffering for you, it is also the product of what you've done in the past. Now, in our culture, when we use the term karma, every time I hear it in television and the news, wherever people are making comments, always talking about it as negative, right? Like, oh, they'll get their karma yet. That's their karma because something negative happened to them from them being mean with somebody earlier or something. That's only one side of it. Everything is occurring this way. Our good experiences are our karma as well. Karma is essentially a principle of cause and effect. We create the causes through our own minds and our actions on the basis of that, physically and verbally, to have certain experiences. That's the effect. We often talk about karma as being all of that, but karma essentially is the cause. It is everything you are doing with your mind and, again, body and speech every moment of the day, you're creating some karma. Whether that karma is powerful or not depends upon a whole lot of other factors. I won't go into all of that today. But the idea is that this is the mechanism by which you have these experiences in your life. Things are not random. They're not happening on the basis of some creator God testing you by throwing certain sufferings at you or what have you. This is your own stuff. When people hear this, and I know a lot of people, when they hear these teachings, they go, wow, I don't want to think that way. They would rather not be responsible for all of that in a sense. But it actually is empowering to think that you're responsible for that. That's what Children's getting at with this too, because now when you have this thing coming back at you, this wheel of sharp weapons in terms of this suffering that is based on something you did to somebody else of a similar nature, which is of course just one of the results of karma, and I won't go into that in great detail. But if when you have that coming back around to harm you, well, that's your perfect opportunity to see it for what it is and to do something different. With that understanding that this is your karma, well, then you have the ability to say, I don't want to experience that again. I'm going to do something that is more positive. So if you're being treated poorly by others, people constantly criticizing you, putting you down, whatever, you've done the same thing in the past. And even if you think, well, oh no, I've been really careful this life. I'm really watching my speech and I don't put other people down and da 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 da. Well, you did it at some point. That gets into the whole topic of rebirth. Karma doesn't really make sense as a principle, in my estimation, if we don't take into consideration prior lives. And of course, past and future lives is dependent upon the nature of mind. We talked about mind last week being a non-material phenomenon that has the function of knowing things. It is a continuity of awareness that goes back without any beginning, goes forward without any end. So when we have a larger perspective of what's all going on in this, what we call our lives, that we have many things that we brought forward, karmic seeds that shape our experiences in this life. And I guess for most of us, if not all of us who are listening to this, we have incredible good karma that has created not just this human existence, but one in a world where we've got all the resources that we need generally, that we have the good fortune of being relatively protected and safe most of the time, have good health, have good health care if we don't have good health, and so on. So many things that we have created. But we've also created the seeds for the negative stuff to happen, for the illness to happen, for the occasional conflict with people to happen. Those are learning opportunities for us. The best way to frame our negative experiences is I've got something to learn from this. This is the best way to frame karma as well, not to see it as some sort of cosmic law of reward and punishment, but rather it's all a learning experience. If everything that's coming into my life is something I've created, well, then I take responsibility and go, well, what can I learn from it? If it's good, well, we can learn that I need to keep creating the causes for that. That's something that most people forget, even Dharma practitioners. They just keep taking for granted that everything is great and wonderful. You spent a lot of time and energy to create those things in your prior lives. Well, then you have to do it in this life. When you have something wonderful that you've received, you have to think, oh, this is a reminder of how much I need to practice generosity. That's the best way to look at everything we experience as a ripening of our karma. If we have something stolen from us, well, then that's an indicator too of that we need to be more meticulous in making sure we use our resources generously, kindly, liberally, so that other people can enjoy those as well. So everything is a lesson for us to learn. Just have to choose to see it that way. I think it's Pema Chodron actually uses that phrase in one of her books. I think it's Start Where You Are, where she says, karma, I'm paraphrasing it, but she says, karma is essentially life giving you the lessons you need to learn. It's a wonderful way to look at it, right? Everything that's happening is like, what can I learn from that? This is the way to look at that we're talking about here in regard to seeing karma as this particular suffering experience, this first arrow, again, to use that analogy that we kind of keep going back to. This first arrow is a product of my own actions in the past. The other person's involved. I mean, we're not letting them completely off the hook in a sense. But why are you receiving that? Why is the arrow piercing your well-being? Because you created the causes for it. And then we can generally know through the more intricate teachings on karma that are given in the Lamrim why that particular arrow Why does the arrow of poverty hit people? Why does the arrow of physical pain hit people, or someone harming your body, or whatever the case might be? Those are all spelled out in more detail. I'm not going to go into that again today. If you need that information, you can find it in the Lam Rim, or even in a wonderful little booklet that the FPMT has about the 10 non-virtues and their subsequent results. There are many results that we have from our actions. One of the main ones that we can learn from is this idea of something happening to me that is similar to what I did in the past. That's what Venerable Choden is speaking to here. When we see something occurring in our lives that is suffering, well, own it. That's my karma. I created that. Don't get mad at the other person because they're not the sole cause of that. They're a part of that picture, part of what's going on. And again, not letting them completely off the hook. But we created it. It's my stuff, good or bad. I created it somewhere along the line. Again, and this really does empower us, as she says. This point of view empowers us because if our past harmful actions have resulted in our current situations being difficult, well then, what we do now is going to have an effect on our future experiences. Instead of getting all bent out of shape and angry and upset, we realize that that's only creating the causes to have that occur again. Well, why would we do that to ourselves? Much less keep entangled with the other person. This is the other problem, of course. We haven't talked about the other person quite yet in all these antidotes. We're not even taking into consideration that every time we respond with anger to what somebody's doing to us, we are creating a karmic connection to continue to be entangled with them in a similar way in the future. They're going to continue to harm us, and we're going to continue to harm them. I mentioned last week how we see this playing out in international uh, scenes going on in our world with countries and having an animosity towards each other, peoples that are not able to get along because they keep furthering these patterns of anger towards each other that don't ever get resolved unless till somebody's the adult in the room and says, I'm going to respond differently. I'm not going to get upset and angry and harm you in response to you harming me. We see this playing out as karma that can be even between nations, that we get an appreciation for how karma is the instrument by which all of our suffering is occurring. As well, again, good experiences too, but we're particularly wanting to focus on the unpleasant stuff. And if we see it through that lens, then we have a very different response. I think there's another little bit here on the readings that I want to go through and then discuss a little bit more. We didn't take our little break though. Let's just do this last little bit and then we'll take just a very short break. From the wider perspective that includes previous lives, we may even come to be glad that the present difficulty has happened. For now, that negative karmic imprint causing it has been expended and no longer obscures our mind. And this is one way to look at it too. This is a heart of the Lojong or mind training teachings, is to see that everything negative that we're experiencing is the ripening and the exhausting of a karmic seed. It comes to its fruition and it's gone. We can be, as she says here, we can rejoice that this karmic imprint didn't ripen in an even more severe result. And one of the principles of karma is that as it resides on our minds, it continues, these karmic seeds continue to grow in their potential for creating suffering. We call that karma increases. It expands. So something very small and insignificant can become something huge if it's left there long enough unchecked. And again, there are techniques taught in Buddhism to work with those negative imprints, those seeds, to uproot them through purification. I won't go to that today because, again, not really the aim of this course. But know that all of that is taught in the Lam Rim in terms of being able to work with the principle of karma. We should see when it's ripening, maybe even the first thought we should have is, oh, good, this karmic seed's ripening now. It's coming to its fruition. And then again, that perspective of, and I can learn from this. If I created this, well, I did something in the past that planted that seed that's ripening into this experience. What do I do differently now? How do I actually change it so that I don't continue to have that? And again, also don't continue to create the patterns of harming other beings and them then harming me and this entanglement that just keeps going on. All right, let's just take about 5 minutes just to get a little stretch break, and then we'll come back and go till about noon. So somewhere around 11:17 or so. Right. So again, karma is a huge topic. I can't really do justice to it today in terms of explaining all of it. Um, What shapes our rebirths is karma, where we are born, the sort of existence that we have. All of this is a product of karma. And karma is perhaps one of the most important principles in all of Buddhism because it explains how we achieve even the results of liberation and enlightenment by creating the causes for those. One thing I might just mention that I like to reiterate around karma is that, we have a great confidence in our world in the law of cause and effect when it comes to our physical things, right? We know, I use the example frequently of a vegetable garden. Here in New Mexico, we don't have a really long growing season. You have to get things started as early as you can without taking the risk of an early frost, right? But if you get your garden all prepared and everything, and you plant the seeds and it has the right moisture and sunlight and everything, we get the resultant vegetable garden at the end, right? But you don't just sit there and look out at your patch of soil where you're going to have a garden and never do anything and keep expecting the vegetables to grow, right? Because they don't grow without their causes and conditions. Physically, we have incredible confidence in the law of cause and effect. This is what science is all about, right? Understanding what's going on with climate change and what's going on with cancer and what's going on with all the various things that are happening in our world. To understand it down to, small levels, macro levels, all of this. And we don't have that kind of confidence when it comes to karma, which is essentially how we have the experiences as sentient beings in our lives. And if we frame it within that context, it's just a part of the overall law of cause and effect. We would get it if it was very immediate. I always joke that if you were getting ready to step on an ant and then suddenly a huge foot was coming down on your head, you'd get it right away. You go, okay, I'll stop. But we don't have that ability with karma because it takes time for karma to ripen. We plant the seed, just like it takes time for that vegetable garden. And then eventually it ripens into its resultant experience. So again, we have to be teachings on karma are complex and difficult in some ways, but we have to see the natural fit that it has into the law of cause and effect and really kind of get that these teachings are there to help us, to really give us a larger framework for how we are working with things. Let's go to the questions that pertain to working with it in the light of karma. They're not so complicated, but I think it is good to take a look at each of these as we go through the section. Because the whole point of this 2 days again is to give you your utility belt, your tools that you can then use when situations arise. So number one, if you have some conviction in karma, then does that understanding help you to see that the situation is simply the consequence of your own past actions that were done out of confusion? This is what we can initially ask, but this is my stuff. This is something that I actually created. Within the understanding of karma, can you see that creating the causes for future suffering by reacting with anger is contrary to your own wish to not suffer? And what we really have to say is like if every time that something that I created through my own confused, angry mind in the past is coming into my experience, well, then why would I continue to do that? Why would I continue to inflict pain on myself even? To see that this is some fundamental level of concern that we should have. But I admit, even people who go to the doctor and hear that, the reason why you're having such difficulty breathing is because you're smoking too much or whatever, they still might smoke as much. They might have a hard time letting go of that cause of their own suffering. It's hard for people to change and for people to take that level of responsibility, especially when it pertains to karma, which is something we can't see. It's not like cigarettes that you can understand and what have you. Something we can't see that has created our current suffering through the force of our own actions. But if we have that understanding, then we at least have the tools to work with. Okay, I need to stop stepping in it again and again. I need to stop getting angry and upset. That's only going to cause my future suffering through my own karma. All right, let's go to the next section. Again, we're still in this overarching section that's about the nature of things and recognizing our limited control. And this is actually that last topic within that section where we kind of see how our control in situations is quite limited. We like to think that we're in charge and that everything, we can just fix it or whatever the case might be, but it's actually not so. Expecting to be happy and to be treated fairly, Venerable Chodron says, we feel that we have control or should have control over all that happens to us. But in fact, our control is limited. on the most basic level. Although we can control some bodily functions, most of our bodily functions are actually outside of our control, right? Everything just keeps happening. We can control some things. We become old. We get sick. We die without choice. Remember, those were the three recollections that I remember or introduced you to earlier today, right? I am subject to aging. Aging is inevitable. I am subject to sickness, illness. It's inevitable. I'm subject to death. My own death is inevitable. Similarly, we have little control over our minds. This is the one thing is that we do recognize that even though we're here with that intention of gaining more control over our minds, for most of us, the amount of control that we actually possess is somewhat limited. 5 minutes of trying to focus on our breath quickly reveals that our mind instead wanders here and there. We are able to control it actually very little. If we cannot control the most basic elements of our experience, our body and mind, how can we possibly control what other people say and do? Yet we falsely think we should be able to. And I wanted to put this one in here in particular because I think this idea of controlling others sometimes comes out in a lot of interpersonal relationships we have, right? Intimate relationships where you actually feel like I can control that person. I can be responsible for changing their minds and getting them to think differently. And then they'll be more pleasant to deal with. And I won't have to find another partner or another relationship. And this is not the best way to go about, resolving situations. Where did I see this? I think it was on the internet at a Facebook page or something. Somebody posted. I think it was you, Anna, that posted this wonderful phrase about it was a sign in a store. Um, do you remember it? Would you share it, Anna? Put your microphone on. Can you put your microphone on and share it? It was wonderful. No? Yeah, there you go.
Hi, Gandon. Yes,
Hello,
I
Anna.
think it was me. It was, I think the quote was, we can't fix anybody. Or it was a question, can we fix someone? And then the answer was no. But then I think I put underneath, but we can be a good example, we can influence, we can maybe help them expand the view, maybe help them see the benefits in changing the view, which is, so important. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, and thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because it was like a sign that was in a store or something about, what can you do to change someone? Nothing. I mean, really, I mean, I'm not saying again that we should think as bodhisattva wannabes, Buddha wannabes, that we can't influence others and help others. Again, that's what Anna was sharing as well. But the idea is that when it comes down to saying, I need you to be a particular way for me, well, good luck with that. That isn't going to happen, right? If we try to mold everybody to exactly how we want them to be, this whole, again, external focus that we think that somehow if we make the external world exactly how we want it to be, we have the right friends and partner and job and home and da da da. We get all these things in the right place we're going to win then, or we're going to be totally happy then. This again is belied by so many of the other things we've even looked at already of impermanence, change. Things don't stay the same. But to get somebody to be the person you want them to be in your, you know, I'll love you if you change into this. Well, good luck. We don't have that control. We don't even have control over our own minds, Venerable Children's pointing out, right? So good luck having control over someone else's mind, who they are and their behavior. It just doesn't work. So again, our control is really quite limited when it comes to situations, when it comes to other people involved in our lives. Our assumption that we should be able to control others is exposed as incorrect also when a relative or close friend has a substance abuse problem. We feel that we should be able to confront the person with his or her self-destructive behavior and cause them to change. That sadly is not the case, right? If many of you perhaps have dealt with a partner, friend, family member who's had a substance issue, and you know that even in those sort of interventions, trying to get them to change, they have to change. They have to want to change. As it says here, we have to be there and help in a wise way, however we can, but we cannot crawl inside another person and pull a few switches to alter their behavior and the attitudes motivating it. Okay. One thing I want to mention in the light of this whole section about changing our own minds and changing ourselves, this is actually some verses from Master Shantideva that I meant to share last week, but I think they're equally appropriate in this section. Just to really look at the process by which we change ourselves rather than trying to change the world around us, especially, again, people who we would like to have control over and make them behave in a particular way. These are 3 verses from actually chapter 5, which isn't the chapter on patience again, but this is where Master Shantideva says that patience, like all the other perfections, is something we change internally. Unruly beings are as unlimited as space. They cannot possibly all be overcome. But if I overcome thoughts of anger alone, this will be equivalent to vanquishing all foes. Again, where is anger made or enemy made? Enemy is made in our minds. If we have anger towards somebody, they become our enemy. But if we change our thoughts and overcome them, then it's as if we've gotten rid of all our foes, because then we don't see people through the lens of being an enemy. This is what we have to deal with. Control in the end is control over our own minds, not control over other people. And this is a wonderful analogy for this process of gaining control over our own minds. Where would I possibly find enough leather with which to cover the surface of the earth? If you wanted the whole earth to be kind of smooth, never have to worry about where you walked because it's always going to be without any piercing objects or what have you, then cover it with leather, right? But where could you find that much leather? However, wearing leather just on the soles of my shoes is equivalent to covering the earth. This is what we're trying to do in all of these techniques, is really to find a way to work with patience from our side so that we then are not pierced in the same way by all the various hard things that we come into contact with, all the thorns and nails and whatever the case might be that we have to meet. And in that physical analogy, it's all the people, of course, that we come into contact with. Then the final verse in this section, likewise, it is not possible for me to restrain the external course of things. Again, that's beyond my control. But should I restrain this mind of mine, what would be the need to restrain all else? You know, once we put the leather on our own feet, then we can go wherever we want. And we're not going to be pierced by the various things that happen. Yes, they will cause that first arrow pain. Without a doubt, we'll have things that cause pain. But we will not compound it with the second arrow, because we recognize we don't have control over all of that. We do have control over what we do in response to them. So again, that's in line, I think, to some degree with what Venerable Children is saying here, and this whole idea of our control being somewhat limited. Now, I've added a few passages that are from another source called Love Your Enemies, and I'm debating whether to share these or not. You certainly are welcome to read them. But the idea, again, is that it goes on about this idea of control and how we label people as enemy through the force of our own labeling and what have you. It gets at the kind of, and again, I'll let you just read those on your own. I think that's probably better. Just getting at the whole idea of interconnection and interdependence, you know, that things are arising through a variety of factors and that we need to be attentive to that. That's kind of the direction we're going with this very next part. Seeing things from the other person's point of view and examining how we actually co-create situations. We already talked about a little bit karmically, right? Because that's part of co-creating situations too. But here we're even looking at the fact that maybe it is things that we are doing or traits that we have that might be playing a role in that particular situation. So we are moving into another section here that is continuing to work with the idea of people that we are having conflict with. And I want to make that kind of the main focus of most of what we're dealing with. Though the last topic that we're going to deal with today is applicable to any situation. So we'll come back to that section in just a moment. Let's briefly review the questions that are in our little practice when we want to work with this idea of recognizing the limitations of your control in the situation. This is section F, the last pertaining to this whole thing that we've been looking at since last Saturday. What elements of the situation are under your control? What elements are outside of your control? kind of helpful for us to investigate that, right? To kind of really look at it and be clear about what is it that I can do something about. And frequently we find that, yeah, I might be able to change some elements of the external, but the most important thing that I hopefully have some measure of control over is my own crazy mind, that I can actually change my thoughts and change my way of looking at things. To what extent are you able to control your thoughts in this situation? And that kind of reinforces what work we might have to do. Hopefully, as you work with this, and I've found this myself, again, just through what meager practice I have, but the idea is that when I meet situations that are in that vein of something like a first arrow, that my tendency to go immediately to anger is not as great. That's good. I have a little bit more composure to be able to introduce other thoughts, and not across the board, but certainly in more situations than when I was driving around in San Francisco, as I mentioned last time. Crazy drivers there, and I was one of them. So anyway, that was back in the 90s, 80s, many years ago. If the situation involves others, given your assessment of your ability to control your own mind, is it realistic to expect to control the other people involved in the situation? If we can't even control our own minds, how can we possibly control other people? And of course, controlling other people is a whole nother impossible task, right? Okay, so again, we're going to move into this next section. But maybe I'd like to do a little bit of practice as part of this, and we do have a little bit of time. I've got a fair amount of material to cover. Let's just do a short investigation. Particularly, I think probably the one that I would like to spend a little bit of time on is to actually look at this understanding of karma, because even though it is something that maybe not everybody has a appreciation for or a conviction in, I think it's useful to spend a little time investigating it. So we're just going to do a very short meditation. I don't want to take too much of our time, but at least to do a little bit of practice together. How I was again intending to use this, I didn't mention this when I reviewed last Saturday, but remember, Venerable Children even says this. The idea is that you spend some time in meditation, reflecting on past experiences where you have had that first arrow stuff, and you've had the second arrow. You've gotten angry and upset at what has occurred to you, and you tried to reframe them and work with them within the context of the practices that I'm introducing you to, and you try them on. This is going to be just trying on the one around karma and rebirth, to try to see if those questioning, asking those about our situation, does it cause you to think differently about what's going on? Does it cause you to lessen your thoughts of anger? And if you find that certain techniques are working for you, then there may be your go-to thing that you have in your utility belt that you generally go to and use. But you should try them all out to see what their effectiveness is. So we won't have time in this 2 days to go through every one of these individual practices. But it's up to you then to spend some time outside of here, going through them and actually working with them and seeing what results you get. As Venerable Rabina says, I mean, learning Buddhism is like learning how to bake a cake. But if you have all these wonderful recipes and you've never tried to bake a cake, well, then how do you know whether they actually work, or how do you know if they produce the result? Well, it's your job to bake the cake. Okay, I'm giving you the recipes. We're going to bake a little bit here with this topic of karma and rebirth, but again, just for very short meditation. So just find a comfortable place to focus on the breath for just a minute or two, just to calm the mind a bit. Let go of any distraction. Then I'll come in and I'll lead you in a short reflection on this topic. Now I'd like to invite you to recall something, perhaps in the past week, though it could be even before that, something that you're comfortable working with, that you feel safe working with in this meditation. Again, a first arrow experience. Were you harmed in some way, perhaps by another person? Situation where there weren't people involved, but recall that incident, that first arrow. Let's just start there. And when we investigate this through the lens of karma, we come to understand that we are the creators of that experience. This could not have happened to us without our own actions creating that. So does that understanding, when you're looking at that particular incident, that first arrow, does it help you to see that the situation is simply a consequence of your own past actions? Your own past actions that were done, perhaps from your own anger in the past, certainly out of your own confusion about things. Maybe even as part of investigating this, can you see to some degree what it is that you might have done that would have ripened into that first anger? Just spend a couple minutes investigating that. So does that understanding of karma, that this occurrence is something you created in the past, does it change the feelings that you have about it? And you take personal responsibility for our role in it, through our karma, we created that. And again, there's often a lessening of blame on the other person or the situation, a recognition that we are much more responsible in the end. But then the second question, with that understanding, can you see that creating the causes for future suffering by reacting with anger to that first arrow and creating that second arrow is contrary to your own wish to not suffer? Is it pleasant to receive the first arrow? Wouldn't we prefer to not have the first arrows? To actually do something that is more responsive to change our karma? You can reflect on that for a few minutes. Maybe even think about what you would do differently then, not just diminishing anger. What would you have done in that situation would be more constructive karma, even virtuous karma? And lastly, does this investigation of karma and the role that it plays in terms of our experiences of suffering give you more confidence to see future suffering through that light, to be able to see that whatever happens to us is not something that is kind of unjust or unfair. It's actually the product of our own past actions, something that we can take responsibility for and even learn from. So again, this wasn't a very long reflection, just a couple of questions. This is how I'm encouraging you to work with what we are doing last Saturday and today. So you've got these different sets of questions that can be used as a particular tool to look at what you are having going on in your life at any time that appears to be some suffering that you would normally get upset and angry at, and to see if it makes a difference. And then you can, by going to that again and again, because I do encourage you to find the tools that tend to work for you better. Some of you may still be struggling with karma, and that may not be the way you'd like to frame it because you're not really sure of all the dimensions of that and doesn't feel comfortable. That's okay. And use another technique. There's other tools in your utility belt that you can go to. But find the ones that work for you because that will be your go-to thing generally. But again, experiment with them. Have some fun with it even. And this is how we change our minds. We don't change our minds by not tending to them and doing things differently. Instead, we have to really study, practice, and things will happen. Without a doubt, we'll be better capable when things arise to not have anger be our go-to reaction and to have a more healthy response. So let's go on then into the section that I briefly introduced. This has to do with kind of acknowledging that other people have a different point of view. Surprise, surprise. Ours is not the only point of view and the only valid point of view. I remember there was a film by Kurosawa called Rashomon. Some of you may have seen Rashomon. It was kind of interesting because they tell the same story through four different people's experience. I think it's four, and so you as you watch the film, you get a different point of view of what actually happened on the basis of that particular person's experience. We often forget this, right? We think that how we see the world and how we see that situation is the only way that it can be seen. We have a confidence in our own perspective that is probably unfairly placed there because other people have a valid perspective as well. And of course, other people also have so many other causes and conditions that have framed who they are. And not always saying that those things are great and wonderful and that we should embrace them, but we can have an understanding again that creates more space for us to be able to not be totally relying on our own point of view as being correct, to actually hear the point of view of other people and understand it to some degree. And the 2016 election in this country was a bit traumatic for some people, including myself. And I was always curious ever since that happened. I was like, can I really understand the point of view of the people who voted in a way that was contrary to me? Rather than putting a label on them and putting, designation and putting them in a bucket and just saying, oh, they're all of that nature and I'm of this nature, they're wrong, I'm right. We do too much of that in our society, kind of polarizing things further by not seeing that there's equal validity to particular points of view. And I'm not talking about, again, that we can embrace everything. It's okay for everybody to do whatever. The idea is that if I at least understand the point of view behind it, then I have a greater ability to see what is driving other people, to kind of get at the deeper needs. That was something we touched on earlier, right? Of understanding that everyone who we meet who is in some form of conflict with us probably has some need that is driving them to behave in the way that they are. And we're often blind to that. We don't even want to hear that at that time. We have to see things from another point of view. The other person has an equally valid point of view that we should at least again understand whether or not we agree with it. So let's go to the readings that pertain to this and regarding seeing things from that other person's point of view. Two parties in conflict often talk past each other. Have you ever had that experience? I think I have many times. Each one is certain that what they think the main issue is, the motivation they've attributed to the other person, the way the situation appears to them are accurate. However, often these interpretations are flawed. A few examples will clarify this point. Um, Maybe I won't read the whole thing, I'll summarize it. Essentially, there was this young 17-year-old Sarah who had her parents, and as she's in that later teenage years, she's trying to, assert herself a bit more and go out into late hours and everything. And the parents, of course, are wanting to make sure that she calls if she's going to be late, that she's home by the particular curfew hour and all of this. And the point was is that Sarah was the person who Venerable Children was mainly referring to because I guess she was one of her students or whatever that would keep coming to her for advice. And she came to see through her meditation and practice that she was not seeing the motivation behind why her parents wanted her to do all these things. From her perspective, the situation was about asserting independence, wanting more control over her life, wanting to move into her adult years and, eventually leave home and be more independent. And from their perspective, it was all about safety, all about their fears that something could happen to her, that her, a young teenage woman who could be very vulnerable and things could happen to. It was all about that. And once she was able to sit down and kind of get to that point of understanding what her parents were about, well, then the situation is very different because she can see what is motivating her parents to be stricter in terms of wanting her to call and be home and what have you. She can see what's motivating it. It's not that they were trying to inhibit her independence. They were actually trying to make sure that her being independent was done in a safe manner so that they could rest easy at night and what have you, right? So we often do that, right? We don't see what is driving somebody to behave a particular way, to say certain things to us, because we're not often asking that question to actually get to the point where we can listen to and hear what is driving somebody to do what they're doing. Back on that whole issue of the 2016 election, sorry if I keep going back to, but we're in an election year again here, another one that's kind of tense in terms of trying to decide pretty big issues for this country and for the world for that matter, because of the role that the United States plays in this world. But, there was a woman named Arlie Hochschild. I can't remember her full name, but anyway, she's a Berkeley professor of sociology, I think, and she spent prior to the 2016 election, she spent 5 years in rural Louisiana and Lake Charles County. Many of you know that down there's what's called Cancer Alley, excuse me, where these companies came in, petrochemical companies and what have you, and they destroyed the environment in so many ways. Some of them are still operating down there with very little conscience about what they've done, not just to the environment, but of course the people living there and the cancers that they've left behind that are showing up in so many of the population. She was interested because it tended to be a very conservative voting bloc in that part of the world. It's like, what are driving people who have this experience of all this harm that is being caused by a negligence of ecological standards and what have you, the EPA, all this stuff. What is causing people to vote in their worst interests, not in their best interests at all? To vote for people who actually want to do away with the EPA and not protect them from cancers and all the harm to their environment. And I don't want to go into the whole book. It's not a book review or anything I want to give, but this is what we need to do. She actually sat at the tables of these folks. She got to know who they were. She understood some of the rationale that drove them to vote in the way that they do, albeit contrary in our perspective to what might be their best interest. There are different things motivating everyone to do particular behaviors. And if we aren't curious, again, to bring that word up and actually want to hear what's going on for other people, we will think that it's our way or the highway, that our point of view is the only one that is valid. Living in our own little bubble with our own feedback that's continually reassuring us that what we are thinking and saying is correct. We don't ever look outside of it and see what are other people thinking. And in Santa Fe here, we're in a bit of a bubble ourselves, a bit of a liberal bubble. When I lived in San Francisco, it was another liberal bubble, right? And it's very hard when you're in those bubbles to even interact with people. It's a wonderful thing called the Human Library that they started in England, actually. And I think it's been adopted in many places. They did it where my friend Tenzin Choki lives in Santa Cruz. They did one of these where you get people who have a different perspective and you have them there available for somebody to kind of check out, and just like you would check out a book in a library, you go there and you sit with them for 10, 15 minutes and you hear their story and their point of view. And so they'd have a label on them as to how you would identify them, conservative, Republican from whatever. And then they tell you exactly what they feel and what it is that they think. We don't have an opportunity to do that often, nor create the space for that. Sorry, I'm going on about that, but that's in this vein of we actually need to see that our point of view is not the only one, and certainly is not the only correct one. So again, this is the whole story of Sarah. I'll skip it. If you'd like to read it, you can go back to that. Due to misunderstanding each other's needs and concerns, miscommunication uh, occurs on the international level as well. This is what I was mentioning earlier about internationally, we see patterns, misunderstandings occurring. For example, during the Gulf War, Venerable Chodron says she was in Malaysia, which is a predominantly Muslim country. There, I heard the BBC News and read the English language paper published in Kuala Lumpur, and got a particular point of view. After the war, she returned to the USA and at her parents' house watched the news reviewing the war, the Gulf War. They seem to be discussing two different wars. From the American viewpoint, the war was about one matter, and from the viewpoint of many Islamic nations, it was about another. I mean, fortunately, we have things like Al Jazeera and news that we can listen to that gives us an alternate perspective if we are willing to do that and not just listen to the channel that we like or go to the website that we prefer. I had a similar experience visiting the Gaza Strip in the late 1990s. The Palestinians there had one view of Arafat as a negotiator, and the Americans had a very different one. In all these situations, personal and international, freeing ourselves from our narrow understanding of a situation, I should say by seeing it from the other's viewpoint, is an effective remedy for anger. We can ask ourselves, if I had grown up in that person's family, society, time in history, and cultural conditions, what would my needs and concerns be in this situation? This idea of kind of seeing things from the other person's point of view in terms of walking in their shoes. We had that wonderful phrase we all grew up with, right? What's it like to walk a mile in someone else's shoes? There's even a little story I want to share here from the Dalai Lama, and then we'll probably need to wrap up this topic and have a lunch break. This is on the slides here. Let's see. Skip that one. Okay. So His Holiness related in his book with Victor Chan called Forgiveness. He related the story of a young Tibetan boy whose father fought the Chinese and who then was beaten with an iron rod by one of his Chinese captors because the Chinese captors captured him knowing that his father had fought the Chinese so intently. How does this story of the Tibetan boy affect your view of the Chinese, Victor Chan asked. He says, how does the concept of interdependence come into this? I asked after a pause. Again, this is Victor Chan and the Wisdom of Forgiveness. This is how His Holiness responded. He said, first, I was angry. Then I felt sorry for the officer, the Chinese officer. Officer's action depends on his motivation. His motivation depends on propaganda. Because of propaganda in China, the counter-revolutionary father of the boy is seen as evil. Elimination of evil is something positive. So the way that it was framed by the propaganda was because the Tibetans are counter-revolutionary and not in favor of the Chinese government and what it's trying to accomplish. They are on the evil side. The elimination of evil is framed as something positive. These are all the conditioning that might lead a Chinese soldier to do these sorts of acts to a young Tibetan. You can't blame that person, His Holiness says. So thinking along this line, instead of anger, forgiveness, and compassion came. Interdependence gives you the whole picture. This happens because of that, and that happens because of this. Clear? So he brings in the topic of interdependence, and I've touched on it here and there, and it is something that plays a role in regard to this in particular. When we look at the other person as a product of so many other conditionings that have led them to have that point of view, then we have an understanding. Again, I'm not saying that we can condone the violence that Chinese soldiers do to young Tibetans or whatever the case might be, but you can have an understanding of why people are led to engage in certain behavior. Everyone is a product of their conditioning. That is speaking to, again, the karma, the interdependence, all of these factors playing a role. We just have to be kind of open to that, understanding that. So let's just finish off this little, I think I actually finished that section. I don't know that we want to go to the practice yet because we still haven't talked about co-creating situations, but let me check. And then we'll do our break for lunch. So, oops, sorry. Need to get the other, somehow I got that one out. It doesn't need to be there. Let's go to here. Seeing it from the other person's point, I did divide this, I think, into two parts. And then understanding the factors or seeing kind of the co-creation of situations. So let's look at the 5 questions here real quickly before we break for lunch. First, are you truly clear on what the main issue is in this conflict with another? You may think it's about one thing, but they may think it's about another because of their perspective, again, because we have to see that sometimes we're not always correct. Secondly, do you know for sure what motivation is behind what they are saying or doing? We may not have any idea. Just like I said, we might not have any idea why people vote a particular way in a national election because we haven't really sat down and talked to those people and understood their thinking. Number 3, can you see the situation might appear to them at this time, how it might appear to them at this time and what their needs are? Do you think that there may be factors in their upbringing and society at large, in their culture or in their personal lives that might be informing how they see the situation? And if you aren't able to know the above for yourself, is it possible to ask the other person to clarify their needs and concerns and for you to listen to them? And I add that in there because sometimes this is a possibility. I'm not saying all the time. If you're accosted in the parking lot, I'm not sure you're going to ask that person to go have coffee with you and talk about why they said what they said or whatever. Maybe it's not that important. But if you have people in your life who you are at odds with, maybe family members, and you're getting together with them for a holiday or something, and you want to be able to have a better conversation with them in the future, maybe you need to sit down with people and actually hear what drives them to have their political views or points of view on various things, so that the conflict can be somewhat resolved, perhaps, or at least the space open for some understanding. When people come to understand different things about others and why people feel that way, they often have very different perspective on that. And the anger is not quite so easy to arise. So this is, again, one of the other tools that I'm going to encourage you to work with is to see that the other person has an equally valid point of view in terms of it being a product of the causes and conditions that have led to that. I'm not saying that it's completely to be embraced necessarily, or that you have to come to their point of view. It's just you have to have the willingness to understand that. Any questions on that before we break? I don't want people to misunderstand it and think that, again, I'm saying that the truth, in a sense, is purely subjective. Because I think that would get to be a little problematic. Because then teachings on karma and everything wouldn't really hold water. There is truth to be known. There are values that we need to uphold in our lives and in our world. But we have to understand why people might even go against those values, why people might do things that are seeming to be completely contrary. Because their motivations might be very different, their upbringing and so on. All right? Okay, then let's take a little break. We're going to have a lunch break till about 1:30 here in Santa Fe. Maybe just one real quick thought of dedication before we leave, just to assure that all the positive seeds we planted these last 2 hours, this actually will ripen into the most beneficial results. So dedicate very strongly for the development of your own mind and heart to the greatest degree to overcome all these patterns of anger, ignorance, attachment, and so on. And to be able to then, from that place of developing ourselves, be of greatest benefit to other beings. Okay, good. Have a nice lunch break, and I'll see you then. All right,